Hi, everybody. It is such a pleasure to be here today, and we're going to be exploring how the work of these incredible designers is infused by heritage, and how they are reviving and reimagining traditional crafts and practices. It is really an immense honor for me to be here today because I'm passionate about fashion and design, but also because the work of these creatives around me is really embodying the spirit of the theme of this heritage and this event, where fashion is really a moving museum, and we see it, fashion and design, and we see it in the work that they are doing. So I'm not going to speak too much because I really want all of them to speak. I'm going to introduce the panel. So next to me is Dr. Erika de Greef. She is the Managing Director of the African Fashion Research Institute. Please, apologies for my terrible accent. As you can hear, I'm French originally. And when I'm excited and passionate, everything, like the accent mixes a bit with the English. Next to Erika is Thebe Magugu. He is the founder and the creative director of Thebe Magugu. Lukhanyo Mdingi is the founder and the creative director of the eponymous brand Lukhanyo Mdingi. Next to us is Mbali Mthethwa. She is the founder and the creative director of the Her Designs. And next to her is Nkuli Mlangeni-Berg, and she is the creative powerhouse and the founder of the Ninevites. So we're going to start with you, Nkuli. In an interview with the New York Times in November 2023, you spoke about what inspired your design. And I'm going to quote, you said you referred to textiles that played a very big part in every single ceremony that you had at home. Your Ndebele heritage, your Swati heritage as well, and the innovation of your parents' generation, which I thought was really powerful. Could you tell us more about that?
Thank you, and thanks everyone for coming. Like I said, I'm a little bit nervous, but I will do my best to not freak out. Yes, so I mean, growing up at home, we always had traditional ceremonies, and in the African culture, there's, with the different transitions of your life, you are gifted certain garments or textiles to celebrate the new transition. You know, for example, when you become a young woman, you in the Swati culture, you go through the initiation, and then you will then be given clothes that represent that you're now an adult. Or if you're getting married as a Zulu woman, you are gifted isidwaba, which is a traditional skirt that is made out of goat skin or cow, and that you would then be wearing in your home. And so yeah, I think that was part of my my upbringing at home, and I've always been interested in that and learning as much as I can about it. And but I also think that our parents, I think my grandmother was a domestic worker, and she couldn't afford to buy clothes for her children, and so some of the clothes would come from the employees, the madam. But you know, my mom and my aunts, they used to rock those clothes better than the madam. So that was really, for me, inspiring. So they used to look so good, but at the same time, also this idea of passing on the clothes and not necessarily consuming, and like making the best of what you had. It was part of our day-to-day. So yeah, that was a big inspiration for me.
Thank you. I just want to stop because we actually have images of the work of the Ninevites that go with exactly what you're saying. So I'm supposed to have a clicker just to go through, so hopefully we're going to, I don't. So by magic, I hope it's going to move on, or if, you know. So obviously that's the designers. I just want to show you. So we're going through heritage and identity. So that the Ninevites. And Nkuli, if you want to go through.
So this is the collective of women. I must actually just like show them some love. I've been working with them for a couple of years now. It's Krista, Merinda, Petra, and Nadia. I'm grateful for them, and I think a big part of the Ninevites and the work that I do together with Mbali, it is about showing love and respect to the older generation, because in our culture you always say indlela ibuza kwabaphambili, which the direction is, you ask for direction from the ones that are already in the front. So, and that is a big part of what I try to do and what we've been trying to do together with Mbali in the work that we do.
Nkuli, I'm showing here a picture also of Krista, who is one of the weavers,
Yes.
who is in the Karoo. Can you tell us more also about, you've been to South America, so it's not just in South Africa, you've been to South America to research for fabrics, and you collaborated with indigenous artists from Peru, and then with artists also from the Karoo. Can you tell us more also about that?
Yes. So I think for me, the initial thing about South America is that I always think that the conversation is happening between the South and the North, and not so much South-South. I mean, I don't know a lot about Brazil, and I don't know a lot about what's happening there, and we have such similar histories, and also just our culture so similar. So my curiosity was about just going there and learning about what was happening there, and I also love the textiles. And yeah, but also really just, because I think it's terrible that we're not communicating with the other people in the South, but I also get it. It's because people in the North have buying power, and so, and they actually kind of control everything. So yeah, so that was for me, that was the interest with South America. I still work with a man called Mario. He has a weavery in his house, at the back of his house, and he works with his sons. And we're still making the textiles. We still, the rugs are made in South Africa, and the other smaller pieces are made by Mario in Lima, in Peru. So yeah, and that conversation is still going, and yeah.
And you said that you found some similarities between actually the different cultures.
Yes.
And how, can you tell us?
Well, for example, they make the best mqombothi. I don't know, it's like a traditional beer. And I was so surprised. And I mean, the medicine, the healing, the shamans, it's so similar to our culture. And I connect more to that than I do in the North. And so for me, it just felt so much like home, being in South America, and you know, just talking about what they've been through. Yeah, so that I think was some of the things that I liked.
The power of the global South.
Yes.
You also curating Lesela, which is a publication where you profile different artists from different generations, but from the continent.
Yeah.
Why was it important to document what you were seeing throughout your travels?
So Lesela means fabric, and the publication, this was the volume 1, and it's documenting artisans from different parts of the continent. And I mean, the importance of that is that I know that our history is an oral history. It's not well documented, but it also means that we live in a society where if you ask about like African design, and like it didn't begin with us. It's been going on. I mean, maybe it wasn't called design, and craft has been happening in the continent for the longest time. Maybe it's just not like in some paper or documentation. So I guess this was for me like a part of just kind of putting it onto paper, and so that future generations don't have to struggle like we are. And so, yeah, and I'm actually going to Bamako on Sunday to continue with that research, and hopefully I'm going to do like a volume 2 of the publication. So it's just to really have it somewhere and document it, and not, because everything's documented by white people, and I'm tired of reading what white people have to say. And I've also committed that this year for my master's craft research, I'm not going to read a book written by a white person. So I'm only reading black authors and writers. So I think that is a big thing. We need to document and tell our own stories, and I think that it's that time. So that's why I'm doing it.
And it is something that is common to all your work, that idea of really documenting and weaving it into everything that you're doing, which is, again, that idea of moving museums and that things don't have to be static, or that actually, it can be moving. This is still Lesela. Mbali, you received the Nicholas Coutts Award and Changemaker Award in 2021. And you explained that your love for African traditional craft making, craft preservation, community development and design was due to the enduring legacies of colonization and apartheid that have significantly shaped your family customs, traditions, and upbringing, leaving a profound impact. Could you tell us more how navigating the complexities of this growing up in a Western-centric world, which you talk about, has shaped your journey through creating the her designs? And I'm going to add another question. You've studied anthropology, which I found fascinating, at the University of Johannesburg, and how that as well has supported your work.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm anxious, but, we move forward. Hello to everyone who's on this panel. Really admire everyone's work. And I just want to thank all the powers that made this platform. What an incredible 2 days we've all shared together. Really feel grateful, gratitude. In terms of why this journey, or how I created the herd, is because I did grow up in a place called Springs in Johannesburg, and it was very Western in terms of how the city is built. So I was always grappling with the palpable disconnection from my roots and my tradition. So I figured to curb that cognitive dissonance, I then decided, okay, let's do some research into African crafts, and particularly beads. And I think that served as a conduit in terms of really guiding me, or making me understand and helping me reconstruct my deeply fragmented identity.
Yeah. And why beads? Why did you choose specifically beads?
Beads have a very interesting story. Glass beads specifically are not native to the African continent. They were brought in with the Portuguese. There are some, in Ghana, they did produce their own beads, and in Egypt, they did produce their own beads. But these particular beads, which are the Miyuki beads from Japan, and the Czech beads, those were imported. So what used to happen is that if a lot of the settlers that came into the different communities would need food, so they would swap, they'd give them a pound of beads for a cow. And that's how beads started being incorporated in the different communities and used as a form of communication, or to identify what tribe you are, what status you occupy within these tribes.
And tell me about, to go back to your studies in anthropology, how did that help you also? Because your work is really also anchored in research, and I know that's what, when I was looking also in your work, it comes through, same for you, Nkuli, and for all of you actually. Yeah. How did that help you?
So just like a loose definition of anthropology, it's the study of human beings and their ancestors, and the space they occupied, and the relations they had, and the environment they lived in. So in terms of using anthropology as a vehicle, it really helped, because then you understand why you come to be. Because my identity is so fractured, and I don't come from rural KZN, it really helped me understand who my ancestors were and why some of the decisions were taken. So it helps in terms of enriching my own practice, even with like some of the symbols I use or like the message I'm trying to communicate in the pieces that I make.
Thank you. Lukhanyo, in an interview with the Hyperbeast after you won the Amiri prize, it mentioned that you believed in the sentiment of community and collaboration and culture. And collaboration, we will talk a little bit later about Cabes and your collaboration with the artisans of Burkina Faso, but you've also worked with the Filani mothers. And it is something that is really embedded in the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand. How important is the idea of collaboration in your identity, that of the brand, and the preservation and celebration of heritage?
Hi, everyone. For me, the beginning pretty much started with my family. I grew up in a home that wasn't necessarily nuclear. It wasn't a mom and a dad. It was my aunts, my my cousins. So it was very communal. And I think that sentiment of a collective was really embedded within the foundation of my life. And I think how that's been able to seep into the point of view of the Lukhanyo brand, but also just myself as a designer and the practice of design. It's really understanding that the power of a collective is something that's a lot stronger than a singular. And for us, it's about really partnering with communities or individuals that have quite an extraordinary amount of finesse within what they do, and how we can work hand in hand with one another to reach the particular project that we are essentially trying to achieve. So whether it is through textiles and working with the community, or it's a stylist or a photographer, or even within the context of business, for us, it's about really aligning ourselves with people that have an extraordinary amount of talent and how they're able to add their sense of ingenuity to the bigger picture of what we're essentially trying to do. The point of view of our brand is about human beings more than anything else, and I think that's why we endorse collaboration in such a meaningful way, and we try to document that, whether it's through our visuals, our storytelling, our communications, our stills, or whichever medium that we feel is strong. And that, to me, is pretty much the sentiment of how collaboration essentially looks like within the Allen brand.
I just want to pause here because I think just listening to the first three of you, it fascinates me how, I mean, this is the origin of fashion, literally, like being able to use the clothes as a way of expressing one's identity. And we know, I'm not going to go into fast fashion and how the world is, but it is true that the world has geared away from all of that, and you are literally reclaiming that, and not only reclaiming it, but brilliantly owning this, like taking the space and telling those stories. Was it always intentional? I mean, I know, Lukhanyo, from the very first collection that you did at Menswear Fashion Week, it was always something that was, you spoke about that regardless of the pressure of the fashion world, you wouldn't gear away. That was the direction. Why did you feel there are pressure in the world, especially you mentioned business. We all know, you have a business to run as well. How do you mix that absolute decision that this is the right thing to do and that it is,
I think for me, it's about really understanding your purpose more than anything else. I was obsessed with fashion and design and creativity and music from The Bold and the Beautiful, from The Days of Our Lives, from MTV, from Boom Shaka. All of these things were just so meaningful to me. And as I grew older and as I started to practice design, I realized that there's something quite purposeful here. And there's also a huge amount of talent that I have within creativity. And I wanted to shift that talent not just through creating something that's three-dimensional, but I wanted it to be of purpose and of service. So there's a whole bigger picture as to why I am so essentially committed to the trajectory of reaching my fullest potential. It's because I'm essentially committed to being of service to the practice of design, being of service to seeing how entrepreneurship and design and everything that comes in between can be in conjunction of working with artisans and working with other individuals so they too could essentially reach their potential within their specific talent. So yeah, it's a vehicle, it's intentional, and yeah, that's essentially why I'm able to be so committed to it, I guess.
Is it somewhat a struggle, a challenge in today's capitalistic also economy? Like,
it is. It's definitely hard because essentially, as much as you can have a really strong intention, you have to be very pragmatic about it. You know, we live in a world where money is needed. So you have to be quite strategic within how you approach these projects and also how you survive, essentially. I have a business where I have a team, I pay taxes, UIF, and all of those things. And it's been really interesting to be in that position as a designer that's really trying to own the role as an entrepreneur and understanding that you have to be so pragmatic within your movements because essentially, as much as you're wanting to create these beautiful narratives and to collaborate and create these extraordinary offerings, there needs to be a sense of commercial viability within that so you can actually grow the business and grow the team and also add on to their livelihoods. So it's really finding a marriage between what's really pragmatic and what's strategic and also what are the intentions of what you're essentially trying to do within the practice of design.
Yeah. Thebe, the brand's ethos, the Thebe Magugu brand ethos, is for the clothes to tell a story about their very origins. And season after season, and I had the privilege also to follow, to know your work from the very beginning and to see, Sam, you've been weaving South African stories into every garment that you've created. Even now with the latest collaboration that you did with Canada Goose, you explained that you wanted to create forward-looking design that intersects with motifs and details that stem from our continent's storied past, complex present, and exciting imagine futures, using images of Basotho blanket prints and images of your own family. And you also said something that I absolutely love about your genealogy collection. You said, I really love this idea of memory as a reservoir for optimism. This is so beautifully poetic, but also so true because, and we need that memory as optimism. Can you tell us more about how weaving memory and personal stories, because your personal stories are also deeply embedded on your work, are at the very foundation of your collections?
Yeah. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out, and thank you for that question, Emilie. So I feel like my brand is an amalgamation of my own history and experience, but also trying to capture sort of key events, people, histories that have happened in the country and on the continent. And yeah, that's essentially the premise of my brand. When I started it in 2016, I wanted it to be an encyclopedic look, really, at all that, all the incredible people, the incredible sort of events and histories that have happened in the past. And I wanted to almost frame it as the brand as an institution. So when I mean encyclopedic, like season after season, as you've mentioned, naming each collection after a university subject that explores that subject within a South African context. So I look at Alchemy, which was a collection where I was exploring the changing face of African spirituality, where I interviewed a series of healers and African healers as well. And a friend of mine called Noentla, she recently became a traditional healer, and I told her about this collection that I'm doing, and she came to my studio, and she essentially had a divination. You know, she rolled out her mat, she threw her bones. We asked a very specific question. She threw her bones, and then I photographed that, and then had it printed on a garment. You know, and I love that idea that, you know, it's we're taking such traditional things, but like putting it into a modern context so that anyone in the world can feel like they can wear it. It doesn't feel like this faraway concept. I really want to bring our histories and our stories, you know, closer to people. And I also think that with reflecting history and preserving history, it's not always beautiful. And I always try and make sure that the collections are honest as well. I think of a collection that I did called Counterintelligence, which looked at apartheid spies who defected from the government into the ANC, for example. It's not a beautiful story. It's not a story everyone tells, but like, you know, to keep history alive, we also have to talk about the uncomfortable as well and reflect that in the collection. So I really want my brand at the end of the day to be a reflection of what's actually happened on the continent and not this sort of utopia. You know, I wanted to reflect the good and the bad.
And the same question as to Lukhanyo, how do you, I mean, it's so great also to see you, the editor of, the former editor of Style magazine, I saw was posting on Instagram wearing a shirt where she had her mother. And it's so beautiful to see how these stories now are traveling the world and literally conquering. But how do you also navigate the challenges of the demands of the fashion industry with the work that you're doing?
I think, you know, and I think Lukhanyo said quite a bit of it. It's about striking a balance, you know. I think I'm lucky enough to have a really strong team so that I can then focus on the creative side, and then they can do the you know, the HR and the difficult part. But we really need to strike that balance, because I can't just sit all day and sketch and imagine and draw, because at the end of the day, it's also a commercial enterprise, you know. So I think doing work that, yes, reflects my history, my heritage, my culture in a very respectful way as well, but making sure that that meets the demands that keep the lights on and, you know, being able to like pay the rent. So I think it's striking a balance for sure.
Thank you, Thebe. Erika, your PhD thesis is titled, and I'm going to read it, Sartorial Disruption, an investigation of the histories, dispositions, and related practices of the dress fashion collections of Ezico museums as a means to reimagine and reframe the sartorial in the museum. Could you tell us what were some of the findings? I know we're not going to go into the entire thesis, but I'm really interested to know what is it that you found and how they have sparked your current project at Museum Africa.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody, but also to an incredible panel of young creatives. And maybe before I get to my PhD, maybe to weave together why museum and design even sit together. So 4 years after the end of apartheid, I started teaching fashion at a fashion school in Johannesburg. So that was in 1998. And for the next 14 years, I struggled with that curriculum. Anybody who's been to any fashion education or design education will know, and as you say, everything is authored by white authors, and any kind of reference to African fashion histories is absent. So there's incredible erasure in the textbooks, in the curriculum. So I spent 14 years fighting the curriculum. And in my last year at Lysof was Thebe's first year at Lysof. So our paths certainly crossed. But that was really the impetus for me to start looking. It was no use just changing what was happening in the classroom if, you know, beyond the classroom, things were unchanged. So this is early 2010, 2011. And I thought, you know, there were signs of transformation in media, still very little representation of African fashion stories or African fashion histories. But even more problematically was what was happening in the museums. And that's what led me to do my PhD in the museum. I could have chosen any set of museums, but I chose Ezico Museums. I was based in Cape Town, because Ezico Museums had just created a conglomerate of 11 Western Cape museums, 3 of which of those museums held fashion collections. And so those fashion collections, of those 3 museums, there were almost 50,000 items altogether. So how does one start to navigate and try and find some questions? So maybe in response to that, I'll speak to the research methodology that I used to try and investigate into that. And I developed what I called a trouser-led research methodology. And if you want to go to the next slide. I'm fine. That's all right. It's all right. It's just because it illustrates. So how do you navigate this really complex question of what is happening in the museums? I thought I really need to look at these collections closely. What was collected? By whom was it collected? And once it arrived in the museums, how was that classified? And then how was it exhibited? And for design students, and particularly for fashion designers, how do you reference material culture histories as designers when the museums are so not telling the story? So I used this particular lens to look at museum collections by looking at all the trousers. So the first pair of trousers on the left comes from the Cultural History Museum. The Cultural History Museum has had 120 pairs of trousers. The Cultural History Museum has a collection that is, I would say, predominantly white-owned and worn by white South Africans. Eurocentric collection. 95% European collection. We know who he was. We have his name, the wearer. We have the name of the person who donated. We know where he wore it. We even know why he wore it, like his job, and during what years he wore it. So a really detailed description of the trousers. If you look at the trousers, they're nothing really great. Very ordinary polyester workwear trousers. But we have all this bunch of information. Cultural History Museums collecting in a particular way. The second pair of trousers, as we all know, so much of what happened in ethnographic museums. So the second pair of trousers was a South African museum, of which I found 5 pairs of trousers in the South African Museum. This was an ethnographic collection, part of the natural sciences. We don't know who wore them. We don't know where they were worn. We don't know who made them. We know who the collector was. And we can understand that the collector was European. And so a whole set of erasures that come and travel with the object in terms of dating 20th century. I mean, what does that say? What does that say about the object? It's not 1960s, it's not 1970s, it's not. So how do we start to work with these erasures of histories? It's a really important question. And then the third set of dress or fashion objects from these museums was the South African National Gallery. And those we were this morning with Ezekiel, the National Gallery as well. But they have, in the National Gallery, they have a collection of African adornment, objects of African adornment that were deemed art. So beaded Ndebele blankets, beaded necklaces, the studded ibeshu. So clothing objects, but deemed as art, collected as art. There were no trousers in that collection. So really interesting to think about what is, absence also tells us a lot of things. So really interesting sort of study across those 3 collections. What was collected and how it was classified and how those traces continue with the garments. And then the third pair of these khaki trousers, the third pair, for 40 years, that particular garment was on display to a public. Those of you that can read there, it is unaccessioned. It wasn't a museum object. For 40 years, that garment was on display in the ethno-gallery of the Sotho tribal dress. For 40 years, in the public eye, representing. But in actual fact, it was a store-bought pair of workwear trousers that kind of dirtied to look kind of authentic. And then there's some creases in the hem, that turn up in the hem. That's for another story. So this object in the ethnographic museum telling a story, so exhibitions as kind of truth-telling. So I was also really curious how particular different kinds of trousers were used in different exhibitions in the Iziko museums. So to answer your question, how is that like informing? So that was my thesis. Really started for me to look at these collections are contested. They are difficult collections. So the last slide is really just to speak very quickly to Museum Africa. Museum Africa is yet again another one of these museums with an enormous collection. There's almost 20,000 items of fashion in Museum Africa. Do we know that? Do we know 20,000 items? But again, there is the Bernberg collection, which is a Western European fashion collection collected throughout the early 20th century. It is 95% sort of white-owned European histories, and that is right on the left-hand side of the building, and on the right-hand side of the building on another floor is the ethnographic collection. So this binary, this divide that continues to divide material cultures, shared material culture histories, in museums, and the kind of really radical problems. So I'm working together with Wanda Lefoto and a curator, Alice Maloney, and we're looking at how do we, I mean, the easy thing is to walk away from this problem. It's so complicated. So it's like, what do you actually want to even start to do with it? But, and I'm drawing on the work of Paul Basu and Ferdinand de Jong, and they talk about the decolonial affordances in these colonial collections. Carolyn on Wednesday Carolyn Hamilton mentioned how these collections and museums were created by the ideologies at the time. And we can't carve those ideologies out of the collections. They are a result of those. And so how do we start to look for the decolonial affordances? How do we start to look for the slippages? How do we look for the cracks? How do we tell different stories with these very contested collections? And so hopefully at some point this year, we'll be able to put together this exhibition that starts to dig into, to tell those difficult stories and to blur those binaries that continue to erase certain fashion histories in this country in the 21st century. Long answer.
Thank you, Erika. And I think, if anything, it shows that there's so much work to be done still. And it's a great, thank you, because it's a great, actually, introduction to the next step, where I'm going to go back to, because it's one thing, and we've been talking about all the work that is done before you even start a collection, whether it's with the Ninevites or the Her Designs or all of your brands. But it doesn't stop there. I mean, we talked about Lesela, but Nkuli and Mbali, you also collaborating together. You've co-founded Mila Sunday Crafts exactly to do also, to work on this decolonization of the spaces and really reclaiming your space. Mila Sunday Crafts means, Mila Sunday means growth and multiply. This, you said, is your participation in discussions surrounding decolonization, restitution, and innovation within the African design and craft industry. Could you tell us more about how important this project is? And we see here an image of the retreats and the workshops that you've organized. And we'll talk about the academy later, but tell me about these workshops and why they are so important beyond the design work that you're already doing.
Do you want to say? So Mbali and I came together. Actually, it was a bigger, we reached out to different designers to ask if they wanted to be part of this. And we started this, I think it was during COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the design, I think fashion is doing better, but when it comes to like the interior design space, it's not a very nice place for Black people in this country. And it's expensive, and you're often, I don't know, like if I have to participate in any like big design thing, this Cape Town furniture design right now, the stand is like 30,000 or whatever, and so someone like me would not be able to afford it, you know. Anyway, so we came together and we wanted to create like a platform where we could have some of these conversations, but then it kind of like evolved into me and Mbali were the last two men standing, so we continued. But the idea behind it was because part of what we do is that these are dying crafts. There's not a lot of people beading who are our age and younger, and there's not a lot of young people learning how to weave. Now I think slowly it's happening. And I actually started this specific project, the Loom Life project with Sibabalwe, who is on the panel. And Sibs and I did some weaving workshops in Johannesburg and Cape Town where we'd just invite people. We used to call them wine, weave, and beats. So I love wine, so we're like, how can you know, I make Sibs happy, and I can drink wine, and then we can get a DJ, and it's a vibe. So we did the events, and it was really successful. And then Mbali and I then wanted to take it further, and we organized a craft retreat where people could come and spend time with Mam Beauty Ngongo, who is an incredible basket weaver, who's living in KZN, and you know, her work is at the Met, her work is all over the world, but in South Africa, unfortunately, not a lot of people know of her. And so she facilitated the workshop, and the participant could spend the weekend learning to weave from her. And yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, just to add on to what Nkuli's saying, there are a lot of, a handful of that we've researched and found. There are a handful of master craft families, like for example, the Nala family, which are they make Zulu kambas, and they are incredible, and it has been a process and a practice that has been passed down from one generation to the next generation. And like Nkuli was saying, their work exists everywhere in America. They get taken to America a lot of the time. Their work exists in museums in Europe and America, but we don't quite celebrate the Nala family. So I think in terms of just decolonizing that space and restitution and creating awareness, we're trying to celebrate these giants while they're still alive, and to also remind those that maybe have forgotten about the crafts, and to create awareness for those that don't know anything about the craft. So it's still in its teething phase, but we are slowly trying to define the process and the concept and the ideas around what it is. But it definitely has to do with design and craft and honoring those that came before us.
And I love that, because also what I hear, museums can be quite intimidating also in the space, like what you're doing is almost breaking those walls and bringing things with wine and music and DJ and making that experience, or experiencing those who came before us in a way that is accessible, and even more so that you can pass on those traditions, which also is what museums should be. It shouldn't be just, again, static and not, I mean, we see it, you don't touch, you just look. You're breaking those boundaries, which is, Nkuli, talking about the master crafters and master weavers, you shared with me this image of Alina Ndebele, who is a master weaver, and can you tell us more about why you shared this image with me? And tell me about the project.
Mom Alina is so dear to me. I mean, I might cry just speaking about her. I think she's probably one of the first black textile weavers in this country. She's very old. She lives close to Vryheid in KZN. And she, actually, how she got into weaving was that she was a nurse, and there were Swedes who came to KZN, to come and start, you know, when you, I don't know what you call it, but they were basically helping patients by teaching them craft to get better, yeah. And so Mom Alina then was a nurse, and then they asked her to be the translator, and then she ended up actually weaving and became one of the best weavers. So her work is also in massive collections. Internationally, I know that the Johannesburg Art Gallery has some of her work. And she actually opened a weaving school in KZN, but it didn't really work out. So I've been documenting, I've been going to visit her, and I've been making videos of her and her telling me her stories, and we just chatting and like trying to help her with her book. But it's also been a space for me to learn so much about myself through her and through her work, because she had access to, because I just want to say, like, as much as we want to be doing this work and talking about these issues, sometimes we don't have a choice. Yeah. Our people were erased. And, you know, like I'm studying in Stockholm, and a lot of the students, you know, when you ask about what they're doing, it's like they're talking about the forest or whatever. And I'm like, and I would love to make art about just some random pretty thing. But I also have a big responsibility as a Black person. And, you know, yes, we are trying to innovate, but at the same time, we are behind in a way, because we're constantly trying to fix what was broken. Whereas the white designers, they can go crazy and like experiment with all kinds of stuff. So anyway, so I think in a way I'm also grateful for Mom Alina, because she had a completely different upbringing. She grew up in nature, and her work is so much about nature, about the stories that her grandmother told her and all of that. And I didn't have access to that when I was growing up in a township, because there are no trees in the township. There are no birds, you know. So yeah, I think, yeah, I'm working with her, and hopefully we will show her work in the future, so that other young people can see it, and like other generations can see it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's a really important reminder, because it's also, I mean, I know we speak a lot about that, and these are award-winning designers who are literally celebrated on the international stage, but it's a great reminder that the work behind to do what you're doing is so much more than what we know, what we see in the glossy pages of a magazine or in a New York Times article or. So really thank you for sharing that, Nkuli. And can you tell us, because that's also, I was absolutely, you through WhatsApp, you told me that about your masters that you're doing, in addition to all the work that you're doing at the moment, and you're doing a master's on craft and heritage, and you're looking at digital collections of African crafts. Can you share that with us? You shared with me this beautiful image, and yes.
So some of these objects I found in the different. Also, I'm in Stockholm trying to learn about African crafts. So the only access I have to African crafts in Stockholm is the digital archive. So I spend a lot of time just geeking and looking, and these are some of the objects that I found in like the Smithsonian and British Museum, and but again, I think through these collections I'm learning so much about my language, my culture. So I'll find like Ikansi, which is a mat that we grew up having at home, but then like never really asked the questions like how was it made and like what are the different uses, because, but also I actually have a question, because also what I'm finding interesting is that we have us, this is, because that's the thing, like for us was everyday home stuff. It wasn't something that you are packaging and putting behind a glass, you know? So I'm also just thinking about all of that, this like craft and being functional, as opposed to craft being kept in these spaces in these museums, and so yeah, right now I'm just dreaming and looking at these things and just loving them, but hopefully I will create something for my master's presentation from that.
But it shows also the importance, what you were saying, of really decolonizing museums and giving space for, histories of this continent, not just South Africa, but really giving space so that they are accessible and that you don't have to, it should be easier to be able to access histories.
I mean, we've never seen a lot of these because they are in Europe and they are all over the world.
Exactly.
And a lot of the kids in the continent will never see it. So, Emmanuel Macron, don't just bring some, bring all of them back.
Yeah. Yes, that's the call.
Yeah.
Mbali, in 2019, you were commissioned to make, so that's not the one, but I'm going to show a picture now. You were commissioned to make a beaded tapestry for Nike for their facility called Chapa Soweto. And more recently, you collaborated with architect Kate Otten and Frances Van Hassen Mohair, she's based in the Karoo, to create an installation called Threads. Yeah. That was presented at the 2023 Venice Architecture Biennale in the Dangerous Liaison section. The installation seen here used tapestry and beads and told a visual story of Johannesburg. Can you tell us, so I want to share the two, that's the threads, and this is the tapestry you did for Nike. Yeah. Can you tell us about this collaboration?
Yeah. Yeah, these are some of my OGs, my team members. So we were approached by Nike to create a beaded tapestry. We used about over 1 million glass beads. And just the scale was 4 meters by 5 and then 2.47. And it was incredibly challenging because we had never created a piece that big. And also it was my first project, my first big corporate project, and the challenges were extremely challenging.
In which way?
Just working with older women and women in rural areas during COVID. That was, I had to drive back and forth in Mpumalanga because I work with women in Mpumalanga and in KZN. And that was really challenging. And beyond the project, when you work with artisans or people in rural areas, you're not just, you can't just go there and extract. You have to be part of them and you have to integrate yourself into that community. So, because I'm seen as an outsider, well, I was seen as an outsider then because we had just started our relationship. Because they're desperate and they need somewhat of, it's all about economic pressures. They need to eat. Like this what they do is a point of survival. It's not, they're not playing, they're not in cute little studios making cute little objects. Like, this is a survival. So that was very challenging because I couldn't just, it wasn't just about the project Nike. It was about other things, like Mbali, we don't have masks. Mbali, we don't have bread today. Mbali that, Mbali this. And I'm happy we all stuck it out and we were able to create the piece, but, and even in terms of like the corporate pressure, they don't care about your problems. They just want to see the end result. And I wish like the collaboration between corporate and artisans could be more, not emotional, but have a bit of empathy, you know? If you're going to be working with people who come from marginalized communities, your demands are not going to be how you demand things from people in the global north and the west is not going to be the same as working with people from indigenous groups and the global south. So that was very challenging.
I just want to, and you said something that I think resonates with this entire 3 days. You said, you know, I was briefed, and then I wanted to work with artisans, and I can't just go and extract from there, which is this word, extracting, is exactly what you were talking, Nkuli, about restitution and why it's important. We can't just go and extract things, and that work that you are doing about first understanding, why are we doing it? What are they doing? What are their needs? How is the collaboration, and not just go, pull, and leave?
Yeah, and I guess that's why I love anthropology as well, is because anthropologists don't just, they don't insert themselves into a situation. You're there, you're kind of looking from afar, and you're very conscious in how you, well, at least African anthropology. African anthropology is like integration and becoming before you go and write on paper, and, you know, making these amazing theses, or writing these amazing, rather. So yes, yeah. That's the tapestry, and it's in Shapa, so it's a clip straight. So if you get over your fear of Johannesburg and being killed or whatever, I do suggest you go and visit the facility. It's a world-class facility. They spent a lot of money, and it's free for the people who live in Klipspruit.
And can you tell us a little bit about the threads?
Yes. This was a fun. It was a smaller piece, like 700 milli. I'm so bad with measurements, but yeah, it was. But it was pretty challenging because we had to make the beads flow, and beads are very solid. They don't flow, you know, unless you have to manipulate. So it was really cool and beautiful, and it was a vision that Kate Otten reached out to Francis and I, and we contributed to her vision. And just to tell you a bit about that piece, so I don't get it wrong. So it's called The Golden Thread of Johannesburg, and which started 2 billion years ago when a massive meteorite crashed into the Earth approximately 100 kilometers south of Johannesburg, and it sent gold deposits into the seams and onto the surface, which rested in an arc shape. The discovery of gold in 1886 and the gold rush that followed led to the establishment of Johannesburg, which is known as the City of Gold. And the woven cloak is to cover, it represents a cloak that covers the body for warmth. It's a socio-graphic mapping of the surface landscape, and a typography where green spaces correspond to privilege, wealth areas, and treeless areas, to poor neighborhoods with mining waste dividing the two, and the gold mines. The gold mines and the water courses that complete this reading. And then the beaded necklace is to adorn your body, and it is an astronomical mapping of the sky, symbolically made of gold extracted from the earth. So she was just telling the story about Johannesburg and the meteorite, and what the sad catastrophe of mining, what we see today, the inequality and people's displacement in Johannesburg because of the mines, and yeah.
Thank you, Mbali. And I think it's so nice also to see how you use your design from her designs and completely transfer it into something that reach new audiences and really speak to also breaking those walls. Lukhanyo, I know we've spoken already a bit about collaboration and the importance of collaborations in your work and how it's intrinsically linked with the idea of reviving and reinventing traditional crafts. Here we see images, and I'm going to play more images, of the collaboration that you did with the textile artisans at Cabes in Burkina Faso. How, in your experience, are these collaborations with craft communities and artisans ensuring the reviving and reinvention of traditional crafts with this idea, because I know also this idea of not extracting is so important also for you, and working in collaboration with the Filani mothers or here with Cabes?
So essentially, it was in the year of 2013 when I was doing my third year in CPUT at Fashion Design School, and there was a workshop that focused on textile development. And I hadn't been privy to textile development at all, and it focused on felting. So felting, there's no loom or interlocking whatsoever. It's pretty much using two blended yarns, whether it's merino wool and mohair and water, soap, and literally rolling the yarn together. And during this whole process, it was quite a revealing experience to recognize a sense of honesty literally been, lack of a better word, woven within the fabric of what was essentially being created. And that's when I really started to do more research within craft and really understanding what craft means and how that can be expanded within a contemporary way and how I could potentially bring that into my own design philosophy. And so it started essentially with exploring felting with a textile designer by the name of Stephanie Bentham, which led to being introduced to the Ethical Fashion Initiative, which is an initiative that is under the support of the United Nations and the European Union. And EFI pretty much focuses on working with marginalized groups within the regions of Western Africa, Eastern Africa, and as well as Central Asia. And for them, it's about really looking at these groups that focus on indigenous craft through making, like what is indigenous within these regions with making within textiles or beading and so forth, right? And since we were introduced to that, it really allowed us to explore more about what these, the heritage and what the history of these textiles essentially means. And that's when we got introduced to an extraordinary group called the Cabes community that's within Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou to be specific. And we had been working with Burkina Faso, the Cabes community, for, I would say, a good 2 years. And it was really steady, and we wanted to take a very steady approach to really understand how the processes are, and also just to introduce ourselves within their space. I think I wanted to have a very mindful approach of not just bombarding and coming in, taking away. I think for me, it was really understanding the true provenance of who I'm working with and also just the craft within itself. So for 2 years, 2.5 years, we had been engaging and working closely with the Cabes community. And under the support of EFI, we had an extraordinary opportunity, myself and my creative team, to have a trip to Burkina Faso and to go to Ouagadougou and to essentially immerse ourselves within the presence of the artisans of the Cabes community. And to be within the presence of these extraordinary artisans was such a inspiring experience, because you had the opportunity to hear their point of view. And for so long it was through emailing and sending samples back and forth and calling and Skype and all of these things. So it was really wonderful to really have that face value of connecting, and for them to, for us to reintroduce ourselves to the community at large, and the head artisans and the junior artisans and everyone in between. And to also hear the history as to why, specifically within Burkina Faso, why textile development is so important. So it was during the course of the 1980s where Burkina Faso had a new political party and leadership, And they understood the importance of craft within the context of their country. And they really wanted to celebrate it, but they also really wanted to bring it more within the culture of the youth within that particular time. And it has been so proactive since then, where it's now something that's not only part of their heritage and their culture and their everyday life, but it's something that could essentially be bought and consumed. And that is such a beautiful way of how something that is so innately embedded within their culture is they're able to also earn an everyday living and sustain their families with it. And I thought that was such a beautiful sentiment of how there was this beauty of still having this sense of creativity within what you do and having a sense of heritage and history within what you're essentially creating, but also being able to distribute it within a way that is still adding on to your livelihood. And that exchange was just something that I really wanted to be a part of because of how I felt like it was real, it was honest. And so by us working hand in hand with the community and documenting them and hearing their stories and actually being present and communicating and seeing the different processes of developing the yarn, developing the fabric, dyeing the yarn, going to the other villages that are outside Ouagadougou that are 3 hours or 4 hours and seeing what they do within this particular region. It was so inspiring and so important because within the context of being here back home, I'm not privy to that full kind of practice in terms of artisanal craft and how it is really part of their everyday. So just having that partnership and having that sense of ingenuity part of the LM label is something that has enriched us so much. And I'm really thankful that we're able to also actively communicate this through our point of view, but also to see how we can, even through within the context of business, see how we can extend that to our wholesalers so they understand what investment they're doing by purchasing an LM brand that is made within these particular communities. And just going over the social impact report that the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand has been working hand in hand with CABIS and the United Nations. To date, and since working with them, and this is something that I'm so proud of, we've actually created close to just over 2,000 meters of artisanal fabric. And if you really think about that, it's a lot, you know, it's a lot of work, but it's beautiful work and it's sincere work. And even just seeing the fabric within itself, it's making you realize that there's a whole bigger picture to this, and you're part of an ecosystem now where it's a contemporary way of designing, but also a contemporary way of creating something that has an artisanal sensibility, but bringing a sense of commercial viability to it as well. So the collaboration within itself, it's not just this one-dimensional thing. You're able to just understand its true provenance of like where it's coming from, who is making it, but then on the pragmatic side, you're able to see the numbers, and you're able to understand the positive contribution that it's done to our entity, but also the positive contribution that it's done to them as well.
Thank you, Lukhanyo. And I think, again, you used the word immersion, which I found so interesting because whether it was what you said, Nkuli, with Mama Linda and Debele, and so often we are being fed, whether it's in fashion or design, images like that we can see are inspired by, but there is no immersion. There is a celebration one way or another, but that celebration is, I don't want to say a quick fix, but yeah, we are in a world where there is a lot of noise, visual, and what you're all doing and what you're all explaining also is that you're taking the time actually to immerse yourself, to understand, which we should be all learning from, that it is important, and I completely hear what you say, that it is exhausting, and that it is, and I understand, I hope we all understand that, because it is a step that is often not done, that is completely overseen. We celebrate, and we feel like, oh, we tick that box, and that's done, but no, it's a longer work, it's a slower work where you need to understand. You need to immerse yourself to understand how these fabrics are done and how you're going to be, how that is being incorporated in the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand. And you've done that with the Filani mothers as well. It was the same principle.
So of course, the working with Filani has been extraordinary within itself. So it started some of you might know Nicholas Coots, who's a dear friend of mine, and he sadly passed away during the course of 2019. And before Nick's passing, him and I had the opportunity to not just collaborate, but to be friends and to have moments of exchanging information and sharing and having just good, genuine discourse of what it's like to be a designer within the context of South Africa. And what Nick had been doing was just so brilliant and so ahead of his time, and to really be in his presence and to see just the sentiment of how he was able to use his hands in creating a fabric was so inspiring for me. And even just through our collaboration and just through the projects that he had done within his own label, it was just such an immeasurable loss that had happened. And during the course of 2020, I had been engaging with his family. And I really wanted to, I didn't want to celebrate my love for Nick through a post or through a message or just saying, I love you. You know, I really wanted to see how I could extend it by using our shared language of design and creativity to create a body of work that is essentially dedicated to him. So there was a lot of time spent with his family and really understanding how he had been working with Philani, which is an NGO that's based in Khayelitsha. And the NGO Philani predominantly focuses on maternal health, but to bring more, to add more livelihoods to the mothers that are part of the maternal health section, they essentially have a weaving division, just so they can have the opportunity to earn a basic living for themselves. And Nick had been working with the mothers from Philani, and he had been introduced to them by Sean Adams, who's also a South African artist. And that work didn't develop very far. So I wanted to see how I could reintroduce and work with them within the context of the Coots collection. And it really just set the tone of something, a working relationship that still actually exists today. And it's every single woven piece that is done in conjunction with the mothers from Philani is always a celebration of Nick. And that's something that I want to be so clear about. And it's within his spirit. And he epitomizes what it essentially means to be of service through your talent and using your time to see how I can extend my platform and how I can extend my finesse through the hands of working with groups that also are really extraordinary within what they do, but essentially bring more of a purposeful kind of meaning to the work that is essentially being created. So Philani is another extraordinary group within textile developers that the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand works hand in hand with.
Thank you, Lukhanyo. Oh, wow. Thebe, for the relaunch of your website, you introduced the second installment of your Heritage series, which we see a picture here, a series of dresses that focused on celebratory and totemic studies of 9 South African cultures, illustrated through a mother and child motif. Could you tell us more about this series and the images that we're going to be seeing now on the screen? This was also a collaboration with the artists Patu Nembilwi. Could you tell us more about how it all came about?
Yeah, Heritage is a very special series that I've been working with Patu Nembilwi for quite some time. She is based in Limpopo. And the first time I worked with her was in 2017 when I was doing a collection called Home Economics, which, you know, I don't want to say inspired by, I'd rather say it explored the sort of rising femicide rate in South Africa and like the gender-based violence that was happening at the time. And we worked on this illustration called Girl Seeks Girl, which was a woman leaning into the arms of another because they were, they were consoling one another because it just felt like there was this war raging against women, and we have a problem with it in South Africa, but especially with 2017, 2018, it really came to the fore, and I've seen it up. That was a very special collection to me because I've seen it up close. I spoke to Patu about it. You know, when I was growing up, I saw, as I said, gender-based violence up close. A certain family member throwing cups around the house. I remember my uncle would always have to take me out on a walk when things at home became violent. So only now am I sort of associating a walk with health and, a healthy practice rather than this sort of looming danger. But then I spoke to her then a year later, and I said, I really want to celebrate South African cultures in a very celebratory and very modern way. So the first one we did was just each culture, but the second installment is the sort of mother and child practice, which is really special. And I also worked with a lot of professors at UNISA who I asked to please research each culture's sort of childbearing practices. So there's the dresses and there's the shooting and aesthetic, but there's also the text that accommodates each dress. I'm very proud of this project, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art and quite a few museums have also collected it to almost showcase what modern culture, like what these cultures mean today in a very modern setting. So yeah, that's how heritage came to be.
Can you tell me, like, how? And because in all your work, there's a lot of research and immersion. How long does it take for you to create a collection?
How long does it take to create a collection? Because it starts mainly with the theory, I think that's the part that takes the longest, because it's a lot of research, it's a lot of interviews, and I absolutely love what I do because I get to meet really fascinating people on my way to forming these collections, whether it's the researchers, whether it's the subject matter and the people that I'm talking to directly for that said collection. So I would say maybe 2 months is just based on the sort of research and meeting these incredible people who inform the collections. And I think the most exciting thing is taking the theory and the text and translating it into an actual body of work. A lot of people feel like that's the challenging part, but that's the part that really excites me. And I think I'll just go back to the collection I mentioned earlier on with counterintelligence. It's interviews about spies. How does that look like as a collection? And one of the spies I spoke to, she's not allowed back in South Africa. I asked her to go to the police station and scan her fingerprints and send them to me. So from afar, this dress looks like, cute polka dot print, but like it's actually the fingerprints of a confessed spy. And that's how I sort of look at all the collections, like all this theory and research. How does that translate into an aesthetic?
And I know it wasn't part, but can you tell us a little bit about the shirt you're wearing as well?
Sure. So this is actually an evolution of heritage where, it's exploring key South African cultures, but I also love the idea of people exploring themselves and their own history and their own heritage. And in the film you're about to see later, I had this shirt that I had created inspired by a wax print, and it had images of my family all over it. And the more I wore it, the more a lot of people I spoke to at the time really resonated. I'd be walking and, someone would ask me, who's that? They look like you, they have your big nose or something, And it was members of my family, and I thought that last year it would be really incredible to give people the opportunity to be able to have their own it's called the heirloom shirt, their own heirloom shirt, because with wax prints, I think they often have royalty and presidents, and I love the idea of democratizing that, as I said, for people to be able to explore their own heritage. So last year, for 2 weeks, you could go onto my online store and upload anyone you wanted to immortalize, your mom, your dad, your gran, your dog, whoever. It was so beautiful because there were so many submissions, and the stories were actually so, a lot of it was very heartbreaking because a lot of it was people who had passed on, but they were more holding on to their memory and what they mean for them. And I think I always use it as a sort of charm in a lot of ways, because it's my grandmother, she passed, but whenever I'm faced with, say, a difficult situation, I'm walking into a room, I'm feeling anxious or nervous, you almost call onto these people, you know, and I think that was the emotional connection I think people had with the Heirloom Shirt project, which I will continue doing every year now.
Thank you. And it's important because also what we were talking about, not putting things in glasses and wearing things that, because that's also what restitution, it's objects and memories do strengthen us.
Yeah.
And that's why they are so important and that's why they need to come back. Erika, at the African Fashion Research Institute, which you co-founded with Lesiba Mabitsela in 2019, you have created a glossary, launched a residency, an online course, and a podcast, as well as new patterns. Could you tell us about these different projects and how they help reach new audiences, as well as rewrite fashion histories that speak to Afrocentric ways of wearing, knowing, making, and styling, often absent, which you've told us about in fashion books, exhibitions, and imaginations?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Emilie. I mean, I think just listening to all of you, I mean, we just want to like transport that into a curriculum. I mean, that is, I mean, so the work that you do as designers in terms of your research and exploration is that double work. It's that incredible work. And so in 2019, so after my PhD, I spent a year at Zuidsmacher as a curator, and I met Lesiba Mabitsela. And in 2019, we decided actually, you know, the need for a research institute that holds these kinds of knowledges that is not happening in the fashion schools, it's not happening in the museums, it's not happening by researchers elsewhere. There's a lot of books about African fashion from elsewhere, but that need to start to author it and hold it here in one cohesive space. So in 2023, last year, we were very lucky to get a grant from the British Council towards writing some of these new narratives. And I think design is also trying to write new narratives about tradition, about craft, about histories. And so we created these 3 projects, and the first of the projects was really a glossary as a way of how do you change the language of fashion. So talking about tradition and traditional objects, what you have done is made it relevant today. It's not something from an ancient past, stuck in an unchanging past. You know, so really bringing it into the everyday. How do we change those languages? And as designers, you've got a particular set of tools. But as students, how do they start to get those tools? So the question of a glossary, it was co-created like a public call for terms and words used on the continent. And the 3 projects that we curated last year were curated around the idea of a fold. So in African fashion, a lot of garments that carry folds in them, folds of wearing, folds of making, but also kind of like a metaphor, what's hidden in the fold, what's tucked away in the fold. And so the glossary was one way of finding new words, new terms that we can start to insert into the way in which we speak about African fashion. And then the other project was a research residency. So on the left, you'll see that is bark cloth. It was a Pan-African research residency. And we're kind of touching into it here as well. How do we learn about fashion across the continent and about practices, living practices that are relevant to the creative process? So it was a bark cloth from Uganda research together with the Isidwaba in Durban, which is a pleated leather garment. And how do these craft practices start to articulate for contemporary practices? So really immersive research residency that starts to unearth, possibly also bring forward like an African avant-garde, an Afro avant-garde, not of the deep only of the deep past, but also for the deep future, an avant-garde, a way of thinking ahead, so tradition is lying ahead of us. So really, really interesting body of work. And then the third was a podcast series. And in the same way that I think each of you with your research, how do we thicken the understanding? I mean, I think everybody sort of goes, you know, a T-shirt, when did it come about? It's multiple meanings, it's histories, it's transformations over time, these kind of thicker knowledges of fashion garments. And so this was a particular research done by one of our colleagues, Thebe James, in the Eastern Cape, looking at the iqiyya, the head wrap, but really sitting with it, not just, oh, well, that's what it is, tick box, and a kind of fast research, but really kind of what do these garments carry? What kind of histories do they carry? What kind of meanings do they carry? What kind of transformations over time do they carry? And so this is a podcast. So how do we bring these projects to new audiences? Is thinking through, so a podcast in terms of its accessibility, not just a publication. The residency is kind of immersive, people engaging with people. And then the glossary is a downloadable zine, so it can also be accessible to, and we worked with sound bites as well. So also just trying to think through different things. And so going right back to the educational component, how the fold as a place of research can start to contribute to educational opportunities. So we're thinking of the fold as an online course. What can the fold start to produce? And then the second project that we're also working with is another project that we call New Patterns. And so there's just a very short little clip.
I want to go back to it. If the magic is not operating, like it's like the AI has literally taken over the... Let me see if I can. Yes.
So just a really, really small little clip. It looks historical. So really just a clip of a project that we're doing called New Patterns. And this was a project that we are looking at and was created last month. So looking at histories of fashion that are absent in South African imagination, but also in South African imagery. So this was a project in a township. Very often, histories of townships are erased. Histories of activities that happen are tiny little like snippets or fragments. How do we start to thicken out through creative, speculative projects, recreating some of those histories as references in a way like the heirloom shirt? But how do we recreate those things that did happen but were never recorded? How do we work into those absences? And these new patterns is new patterns of thinking about fashion on the continent, thinking about South African fashion histories, thinking about African fashion histories in order to be able to decolonize those curriculum, in order to be able to decolonize the practice of fashion. So creating new patterns literally is trying to change the algorithm.
The famous algorithm. I'm cognizant of time, and talking about new patterns, and also using the medium of video to fill in the spaces. And really, we have your film, Thebe, to show, which is Genealogy, which features your mother, Magugu, and your aunt, Esther Magugu, in conversation with you in this beautiful setting where you're around a table and you're just going through a box of memories and photography. And that's where actually that memory as a reservoir for optimism came from. Do you want to tell us a bit about the film before we play it?
Sure. So this was Genealogy. This was the video that I did for Paris Fashion Week, and it was myself, my mom, and my aunt sitting around a table. And this collection was different to the other collections because whereas collections before that reflected the external, it wasn't really about me, it was about like other subjects and other events. That particular season, I think I was feeling quite down, and I think when that happens, I tend to look inwards, and that's where that collection comes from. We were unpacking old family photos, my mom, my grandmother, my uncles, and I took those images and translated them into a collection. And although at home we didn't have much, it was so fascinating to see how one garment traveled around the house, whereas like one dress on my grandmother would look quite religious and devout. My aunt would take it and completely transform it. And if that was the 70s, I think it was like this localized punk. So she'd cut it up and turn it into something else. But this was just one garment going around the house, and I wanted to explore a collection that looked at that phenomena.
So if we can play the film.
My name is Thebe Magugu. Thank you so much for joining us this season, which is a little different from the seasons that I've done in the past. I have the pleasure of introducing my mother, Iris Magugu, and her sister and my wonderful aunt, Esther. And today, we're going to be unpacking a box of family photos, and each photo inspires a look from the SS21 collection. I really love this idea of memory as a reservoir for optimism, which I think is something we need now more than ever.
22, exactly.
What did I say?
21, you said 21.
So this is one of my favorite photos.
So it was my favorite output.
No, like this designer in the 50s, 60s, I think. Yves Saint Laurent. And I got the suit with like this color blocked thing.
Yes, meaning.
I just am like how not really mean
Exactly. 2 centimeters.
This photo, I still can't believe, actually. The way Hosenang Sepeka thing.
No, I carry in Ilhonans by a hamatlo pooping, I carry but ba bereka di bere, ba hello matlo. So in Ilhonana start monomo.
But we were the first group, I get the
we were.
Okay, but I love this trench coat, thing. It's so beautiful.
Never it's a tweet.
Tweed, yeah. Debo. Always in thought. Genie anyway.
It used to be the thing. I remember one pair.
It was just like a statue.
Some of them used to have a flag.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Guy with. Actually.
Too much.
And then this is Jaconeliko Anka. I know enjoy Kuruman.
Pat. Nikiberek, I can Nikiberek yellow in the Nikita Jeff and company. Nasamona Berekati.
Oh, and Yahopola was like overlooking the machine. I love this photo, more the studio. Well, cooking by Lene.
So, Harry Clarence all Lesotho for the holidays. Manso, sister Grahamati, or Nathola Zaya, Arza food to learn. So, I want our 2 piece on it.
Yeah, I love this photo as well. And the Kinhanaki Mosese actually.
Get 2 piece, go high, kiss the class.
Tali figure belt, that thing, it has power shoulders.
I'm telling you.
No, until when I did matter to her.
Yes, on a pajama party, I think. So, yeah.
Okay.
But by the way, how are you?
No.
I give money.
Actually, my character, the 19 and in these colors, lilacs, pink and guava. It's beautiful. And it looks like you guys had a lot of fun.
Too much.
That's that.
Yes.
And then more character, this all red look. Onole kai.
Re ko sekolong wa gopola ko Free State Technicon. So one of the this night mo ileng gore ra kopana ko Hayesville Gamut ke hostel, one of the hostels.
Oh, okay.
Tsa banyana, so we had this evening gala or something like that.
Yeah. And I see a lot of these photos. You did quite a bit of modeling.
Yo, I was a model, hey? In my time.
Oko the high school, the name of the...
Miss Emma Moore.
Emma Moore. Okay, okay. And clearly there's so many photos of modeling. Was it the same sort of...
No, it was another contest, this one. I don't just remember. I used to almost every month there's
something.
occasion, so I'm in.
And Matthew supporter,
yes, yes.
I love this dress. You know clearly.
Two-piece.
Yes.
Figure belt and then I feel like mongwe. Yes. You cannot escape this photo in Claire. Do you guys have like a favorite memory le Mateo?
Mateo na omona ja kale mo kitchen yana ona dira discounts ona bake ona paya ona ukilo one sometimes ene Mateo go tla o ratona ya funeraleng be re sala re cleaner le auntie ha bo wa utlo go cleaner gape.
Yeah, auntie, where was this? This is such a beautiful two-piece.
Ne ko Bloemfontein, ke tsena ko Bloemfontein College wa go Politiego, so ne re ke tsenele, you know me, most modeler.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Miss Bloemfontein College or something like that.
No, hana we krile ka.
Towards.
Ne?
Dilo tse rena re ka le things like this go towards. Oh, wow, okay, beautiful. Charata two-piece, two-piece actually. Really. It's very like a design on a birwa. Christopher Balenciaga and Anarata, like the shape, it's all like that sort of square shoulder, lady jacket.
It used to be the thing, eh?
Yeah.
You showed up heads, eh?
Again.
Yes.
Actually, the more you want, like
Levi Pinji.
Analikai mo.
Mo anali Lesotho, so mo motsengone ba dula mo gona in this village. They had choir nyana. So na binela choir thing. So in the inform where
you say you think really?
Ya na opela choir thing mo na erata.
Tiko.
Yes.
Go Lesotho.
Tiko go Lesotho. I carry Samisa Lesotho pela ho abata Lesotho, so you have to put on a blanket. So mara anyway the blanket ko amasbadi apara anytime.
Part of our tradition, I suppose. OCD, Honky, and
Aaron,
yes.
Ishmael.
Oh,
Tatile Moseso or cousin Hakiti Hopola. OCD, got that paisley print, oversized shirt, leather pleated skirt. May his soul rest in peace. And then Mateo Hafika uniform Kera Mama the other day Kilorile Mateo Aile to the studio, I take inside the kai. So Mama maybe that's her way of saying give me send the sample. It was a beautiful dream. It was really good to see and feel her again. Diko America
Wabana Pakaile Apelham, how ya KH hospital.
Yeah.
I think Konale Linyalong or something.
yeah.
Like 100.
Wasn't like a single pleat high waist?
I say I waist.
No, ma, high waist mama. Of Akalo. How about you?
Leno, ko Lesotho, ke ko Lesotho. Mama, nkgono Makwena le bro le papa Hamatiro, they are brother.
Oh, okay, because I've always wondered what the connection
So
is.
this is the husband. This is ke rakgadi wa bo Matiro actually.
Oh, okay, okay. Ke ratile shape ya collar le shwe. It was very inspiring. And Maverick, all these memories, but
Old good memories.
We're running way over time, so we have to thank you so much to this incredible panel. I hope you leave as inspired as I am. Thank you. Thank you, Nkuli. Thank you, Mbali. Thank you, Lukhanyo. Thank you.